Hello and welcome to a look at the Summer Olympiad for the Amiga, a game that was made by Tynesoft. As you can probably gather from the title, this is a multi-event Summer Olympics inspired game, and in this game we have a whopping total of 5 events to go through, and an opening ceremony which is rather a waste of load time, but it's included for the purpose of including it. Let's get into our first event, which is skeet shooting. Or skeet, yeah, I was about to say sheet scooting, but let's try to keep it serious for a change. In skeet shooting, you place an individual with a double barrel shotgun in various different stations and have 2 skeet launchers launching a set amount of skeets and having the contestant trying to actually hit them with the shotgun. For reference, you can play this game or this event using either mouse or joystick, and ideally I should probably have chosen to use the mouse, but unfortunately I have pulled something in my right arm, making using a mouse extremely painful. A joystick, at least I can hold somewhat close to my body. It's still painful, but it's much more bearable than trying to use the mouse, and that's why I decided to go with the joystick controls. That being said, the joystick controls is surprisingly well coded. When you aim for the different skeets, there is a certain amount of acceleration guiding the crosshair, but it is actually a controlled speed, and not it is the case of many games which has acceleration added to whatever pointer or aiming reticle or whatever it might be, where it can feel like it runs away from you. In this game, it's actually surprisingly smooth, and it's, I would say, based on my experience with Tynesoft titles, I was actually quite impressed by how effective the joystick controls for this specific event is. You need to practice this event to get remotely good at it, because you need to know where the different skeets comes from when you are located on the different stations, and I could probably and should probably have put more time into practicing this specific event, but as I mentioned beforehand, my right arm is quite painful, so I wanted to limit my gaming as much as I could while still making a video of some description, and it is what it is. Graphics-wise, this event is actually decent looking. It's surprisingly smooth, and it gives you a good feeling of being part of a skeet shooting event. The sound effects of the gun and hitting the skeets is very, very satisfying. And I will spoil it by saying that this is most likely this game's strongest event, both gameplay and graphics and sound-wise. You get the option to replay an event after you have screwed up, but for the purpose of my own sanity, I decided to just move on to the next event, which is a triple jump. You waggle the joystick from side to side, and then you press fire to set the speed, and then you increase and decrease the angle of the first jump by pushing up and down the joystick, and then you make sure to actually jump, and the angle will change between each jump, so you have to make sure to constantly adjust the angle. It's a bit wonky to get used to, but once you get used to it, it's not so bad. Graphic-wise, and this event, I think the runner's legs looks more like pistons than actually legs. There is some sort of animation of them actually moving forwards, but it's very easy to get a feeling that they just move up and down more so than forwards. Next event, after our presentation of hard fought for gold medals, is fencing. Yeah. Fencing was an event that was also part of the Summer Games too, and no one liked it. Well, possibly someone liked it, but if you played multiple players, the bouts could take quite a long time to get through. And the gameplay in this specific event is very similar to the fencing in Summer Games 2, except for the fact that it's a slightly different angle and you don't have as many nullifying hits as you do in Summer Games 2. You have to score a certain amount of hits on your opponent in order to beat them and try to parry their lunges and try to counterattack when they try to parry your attacks. Because of the angle, it can feel a bit random, because it can be a bit hard to see whether the opponent is trying to thrust or just trying to parry. But I suppose this part of fencing is to feint, so maybe it's just me being a complete amateur. Decent looking graphics, sound effects are okay, but yeah. Next event, which will be diving. An event that was obviously inspired by the Olympics, I suppose, but also it feels like the original Summer Games, because of course you had the diving in that game as well. And I could be wrong, I mean, it's not the worst game to be inspired by, I suppose, but it kind of feels like someone from Tynesoft looked at that event and felt, diving in Summer Games is a cool event, but you haven't got enough time to actually enjoy it. Anyone who's played Summer Games will know that from you start the dive until you hit the water, you got about 3 seconds to do as many spins and whatnot as you can, and then try to stick the landing or entry into the water, I should rather say, correctly, which is somewhat daunting to do. Sometimes you just close your eyes and count to 3, and then you push up in the joystick and hope that you get a proper entry. In this game's diving version, you have significantly more control over your rotations and that kind of stuff. But the diver is always in motion, so you have to counter turn in order to try and get a good entry into the water. Of course, a straight down dive, or straight down entry I should say, will net you the biggest score, so that is something to aim for. But you can possibly imagine that if you start spinning senselessly in one direction, then stopping doing that and spinning the opposite direction is not something you just do on the fly, so trying to stake a good entry is somewhat challenging. But graphic wise, decent looking, not too bad. I think the animations are a bit stiff perhaps, but all in all, not a bad event. Not my favorite. Skeet shooting is still my favorite. So we get to the game's final event, which is hurdles. Some individual decided that having hurdles in 3D would be great, and I'm glad I'm not sitting anywhere near that individual, because I would use some choice words. You have to waggle the joystick to build up speed, and then as you get close to the hurdle, you press fire to try and jump it. But you need to leave a certain amount of time for the jump to actually take place, meaning that because of the 3D action and because of the fact that you're waggling your joystick and trying to keep an eye on the other runners, it can feel very, very daunting to get right. The times in this race is not exactly on Olympic records or world record times. They're actually pedestrian times, because keeping the speed up, you need a certain speed in order to be able to jump, and getting the jump to trigger because you have to be a certain distance from the hurdles in order to make sure you actually pass the hurdles means that it gets a bit wonky. For reference, I will happily admit that I retried this event several times in order to try and get a decent amount of footage or decent quality footage, but all in all I just gave up. My right arm not functioning as well as it should, and it being my dominant side by a country mile meant that trying to streamline this gameplay more than I did was proving to becoming extremely painful, and I just left it as it was. But at least it gives me a chance to talk about the game as a whole. I've already covered the games series on the Commodore 64 on the channel, and the Amiga versions of the same games are incredibly similar, but just more sluggish. This is actually a bit embarrassing. There's some touched up details here and there, but it's not worth covering the Amiga versions because of the similarities with the Commodore 64 versions. So therefore I decided to take a look at this game instead, because it was in the same similar venue kind of thing, but very, very different. And my experience with Tynesoft and their games is not necessarily the best experience you could ever have, but I have to admit, overall, this game, despite the fact that it only has 5 events, despite the fact that some of them are extremely wonky, it's not the prettiest game in the world, but it's definitely not the ugliest game either. The music in general is a bit bare-boned, but it's functional. It sets the tone for an Olympic summer-oriented game of some description, and the sound effects are, by and large, okay. It's definitely not the greatest sports game ever made, but I will happily admit that much to my surprise, it's definitely not the worst either. On that note, thanks for watching, take care, see you next time, bye bye for now.